Hey y'all, this is Judy from Patterns for Pirates, and I'm going to be showing you how to sew up a very simple classic t-shirt today. I'm going to be using one of my patterns, but you can use these tips and tricks on any knit t-shirt. This is a super classic t-shirt. Think, all athletic style t-shirts that you get, school t-shirts, things like that, that are just, they have a shoulder seam here, side seam here, two set-in sleeves with seams right here, and we're going to be hemming the sleeves and the bottom band and putting a traditional knit neckband in. It's really easy, it's really quick. If you are nervous of sewing knits, don't be. Knits are super forgiving, and although they might be a little bit trickier to cut out and stitch very, very precisely, the stretch of the fabric gives it so much more room for error. If you slip up your seam allowance by 1/8 of an inch, you'll be okay. So don't be nervous. Jump in. Try a knit garment. You will fall in love. They're super comfortable to wear. If you sew for little ones, they're used to wearing knit stretchy clothes. They will love them. They're super comfortable, easy to move in. They won't be ripping them as much if they can move and stretch with them. I have a very lightweight knit here today. This is a rayon viscose crepe slub knit. It's mostly rayon with a tiny bit of spandex. It's super lightweight, which is perfect for me. I live in Texas. We're heading into the summer. This is going to be a super lightweight, breathable top, and I just know I'm going to love it. I'm sewing up a loose fit t-shirt as well, but these tips and tricks can be used on any t-shirt pattern that have these classic traditional seam lines. This fabric I actually got from our Fabric for Pirates subscription, and if you haven't heard of that, it's really fun. We send 2 yards of surprise fabric every month. We tell you all the details about it. We tell you what it would be good for, tips and tricks on working with it, if you need a special needle type, what to stay away from if you're trying to pair it with a pattern. And then we also give you a little Sewist swag gift. And we get a lot of questions. What is Sewist swag? That is just a little gift, a little item we think that most sewists will just love. So some past ones have been a little tape measure with a really cute little logo, some sewing clips just like these. We have done a permanent sticker. We've done t-shirt iron-on. And all of these are kind of sewist themes. If they're not things you can use in your sewing room, we did some sewing snips. Everybody needs those, right, in their sewing room. So it's a lot of fun. You get 2 yards of the fabric each month, and we try to use fabric that we think the majority of our subscribers will love and adore. And also we try to use weather appropriate if we're heading into summer, a lighter weight if we're heading into colder months, maybe a thicker, warmer fabric. So if you haven't checked that out, you should. It's a lot of fun. We have so much fun with it every month. And that's where I got this fabric. It's perfect for the summer. It's perfect for this t-shirt. And I will be using this. If you are a beginner, I would recommend using something pretty stable. That means isn't slinky, isn't drapey, doesn't stretch too much. So something like a cotton spandex and interlock, ribbing. All of these are nice and easy to fold, cut, and sew all together. So that's it. If you need more help and tips and tricks on jumping into sewing with knits, we have a ton of blogs on patternsforpirates.com. You can just search our blog, our P4P universities, and we have all sorts of things from what needle you need, how to hem it, tips and tricks, sewing curves on it, anything like that you can you can think of, search the P4P blog or P4P YouTube, and I promise we probably have a nice, helpful blog with tons of pictures or a video to help you out. If we don't, you can jump on the Facebook group and ask in there. We have over 140,000 members now, and we are full of super helpful sewists willing to help you out. There is never a stupid question. Ask. We were all beginners at one point, so ask away. We're going to get started with our pieces now. I have a back, a front. I have my 2 sleeves right here. I did short sleeves, so they're pretty small, and my little neckband. I went ahead and used the same fabric for my neckband. If you're using a super stretchy cotton spandex, that's perfect for a neckband. A rib knit, that's perfect for a neckband. Interlock was the other super beginner fabric that I had mentioned. I would not use that for a neckband. I would grab a coordinating cotton spandex or rib knit, and you'll be happier. It will be easier for you to work with. Interlock usually doesn't have the recovery for a neckband because you stretch it while you sew. That will be the trickiest part of our t-shirt today, but it's not too tricky, so don't be too nervous. We're going to start by putting our back and front together at the shoulder seams, and I'm just going to pin them. I'm also going to zoom you in a little bit tighter so you can see what we're doing. All right, I have you nice and zoomed in. I am just going to align my shoulders right sides together. And I'm going to use these sewing clips. You can use pins if you have pins. Doesn't matter. So I'm just going to put 2, one at the inner shoulder and one at the outer, and then I'm going to repeat the same thing with my other shoulders. Again, I have these right sides together. My fabric is a little hard to tell right and wrong side. You can tell in person, but it is a little bit difficult. And you know what? I do not have that one right side as I look very closely. If you're using a solid fabric like me, sometimes it can be tricky. You have to look pretty close. If you're using something with a pattern, it's usually much easier to tell the front and the back. So just make sure you have the right sides facing each other as you're pinning. One more clip. All right, so I have my shoulders all pinned up. Now I'm just going to stitch both the shoulder seams with whatever seam allowance your pattern gives. My patterns all have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. That means if you're using a serger, you're going to trim off 1/4 of an inch. So you'll see these little tail here, right here, that is trimming off is about 1/4 of an inch. And then my stitch is about 1/4 of an inch as well, making up the entire 1/2 inch. So there's our shoulder seams stitched up. If you're using a sewing machine, you want to do a little zigzag, and then I recommend trimming with some pinking shears, which are these guys. You can also do an overcast stitch on your sewing machine if you prefer not having any seam allowance left. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go down, we're going to open up. I'm going to put the sleeve in the flat. I like this for beginners. I think it's easier than trying to put the sleeve in the round. We have both on our patterns. Just to show you another way, I love showing different techniques to do different things. I know some people really love a certain way of construction and will never try anything else, and that's fine. You can always construct it your very favorite way. But if you're a beginner, sometimes you don't know your favorite way yet. So I like to show lots of different ways to construct so that you can find your very favorite way. So I have it opened up. This is right sides up, so you can see my seam allowance is underneath. So this is the right side. This is my front, and this is my back. No, this is my back and this is my front. You will notice my back arm side is a little bit taller than my front arm side. Patterns are hardly ever mirror image, and my pattern that I have on here has a notch to tell me that that's the front and a notch to align at the shoulder seam. So I'm going to line my shoulder seam notch right here. Use a clip. Oh, if it doesn't get away from me. I'm just going to pull out a few more clips. Now I know this is the front, so I'm making sure it's going to the front piece of the front shirt. Okay, so I'm just matching the corners here. And then I'm going to do one or two more. And these are opposite curves, so what you do is you kind of just shimmy this one down a little bit. You don't want to stretch or pull. You just want to ease in. What does that mean? Ease in. Just like I'm doing, instead of stretching and pulling, I'm just pushing this curve so that the seam allowances match. You want to push your sleeve to kind of match this arm side. There shouldn't be gathers on a knit sleeve. There shouldn't be stretching on a knit sleeve. It should just ease in just like that. You might feel like you have a little bit of extra sleeve, but it should ease in. So now I'm going to do the back, and I'm just going to repeat the same thing. I'm going to do the corner first, the little armpit area. And then I'm going to do the same thing, just easing in the rest of the sleeve. Once again, if I kind of show you the back side here, you can kind of see what I mean by you might feel like you have extra sleeve, but what you're going to do is you're just going to push this sleeve down until it matches. So you're going to ease in those opposite curves. Just like that. This might take some practice before it feels easy. Set-in sleeves are not the easiest garment to start with. A dolman or a raglan are both a little bit easier because those sleeve styles are just easier to sew. But this is not hard either. It just might take a little bit of practice easing the sleeve in before it feels very easy to you. Okay, we're going to stitch around this. Again, you shouldn't be stretching or pulling anything. There should be no gathers at the seam allowance. And then after I sew this up, I'm just going to repeat on the other side super quickly. Okay, now we have our 2 sleeves all sewn up. And what we're going to do now is we're going to flip it inside out so that everything is right sides together. Just like this. I'm going to move you down a little bit so you can see exactly what I'm pinning. Okay. And here's my shirt. Here's the neckline, shoulders, sleeve, side seam, and my bottom's down here. What we're going to do is we're going to pin from the bottom of our sleeve. Whoop. This fabric is so drapey, it just wants to drape right off my table. I use my phone. The pattern weight, there we go. From the bottom of the sleeve, whether it's long sleeves or short sleeves, we're going to go pin up the sleeve, match this armpit seam, and then down the side seam matching the bottom hem. So as many clips or pins as you need to make sure all those things are aligning. I like to nest my seams at the armpit where they're going up away towards the sleeve. Just a personal preference there. You can also nest one going down and one going up to make it a little less bulky. Your side seams and sleeve should match perfectly. Nothing tricky about this step. It should all be exactly the same. So we're just going to pin just like that. Just wants to slink right off my table. There we go. Down the sleeve to the armpit and down the side seam. We're going to stitch that up with the same seam allowance. And then I'm going to repeat on the other side super quickly again. We're almost done. Zoom you in now. Here's the armpit seam. Sometimes I get that this is tricky because when you're laying it naturally, it kind of makes an L shape. What you're going to do when you're serging it or sewing it on your sewing machine is you're going to try to make this a straight line, and you're just going to bend this all up. Just scrunch this all up on this side. Again, if you lay the t-shirt naturally, it's going to make this L shape, but you can't sew it that way. So what you're going to do is you're going to grab this part and scrunch it up so that this line that you're sewing is nice and straight. And it's super easy to sew. You don't have to worry about making that corner. So again, you just pull it nice and straight like that, and then when the t-shirt lays naturally, it will fold up on itself and give you that L shape naturally. So I'm just going to repeat on the other side. looking like a t-shirt now, right? Really starting to look like a real t-shirt. All we need is the neckband and hems now. So I'm going to put this to the side and grab my little neckband piece. Again, I'm using the same fabric. You can use the same fabric, or if your fabric isn't the easiest to work with, doesn't have a really good stretch and good recovery. What does recovery mean? That means once you stretch it, it goes back to shape. Some fabrics, once you stretch, it kind of loses a little bit, gets a little longer. That's not the greatest for neckbands usually, unless you have been sewing with knits for a while and kind of know how to battle that. Okay, so here is my neckband piece. I'm going to fold it in half. Width-wise, this is the width with the stretch. And I'm going to sew this short end so that I create a circle. Okay, so now I have my circle piece. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it in half now, lengthwise. What you can do on this bad boy too, here's a little trick, is if you fold it together, right sides together, take some clips and very carefully, you do not want to snip through the entire thing, but just your seam allowance there. And that way you can press one to the left and one to the right. And that way, with one press to the left and one press to the right, they will lie next to each other instead of on top of each other when you fold it, and that's just a tiny bit less bulky for you to stitch on and to feel once you're done with your final garment. So as you can see, I folded them wrong sides together. Now I'm going to continue that, folding kind of all the way around my neckband piece. This is my center front. I always cut a notch when I'm cutting out my pieces on the center fold. I find it saves me time. If you didn't cut a center notch, what you're going to do is fold it at your seam in the back, and then right here across from your seam is your center front. So mine already has a notch there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to find the quarter points as well. So you're going to lay your center front and center back on top of each other. And then your two folds now are your quarter points. So I'm going to mark that with a clip on each side. Now my neckband is marked into 4 even quarters. We're going to also mark our neckband into 4 even quarters. One of the biggest mistakes I see is using the shoulder seams as your cornered points. Your shoulder seams are very, very rarely even halfway between the back center and the front center, because usually the front neckline is lower. So I already have my 2 center notches, as you can see. So I'm going to align those and then walk my neckband so that it matches and find my quarter point. So here's my quarter point. And I'm going to do that on the other side. As you can see, it's not on the shoulder seam, it's on the front neckline. And that's again because your front neckline is longer than your back neckline because it dips down a little bit lower. And that might not look like too much of a difference, about 1 inch on this pattern, but this is also a really high neckline. So a lot of t-shirts will have even lower necklines in the front, and it makes a very big difference. I have my shirt inside out right now, and I'm going to leave it inside out to pin this. I'm going to try to get my t-shirt to stay up here, not slink away. So what we're going to do is we're going to match all of these marked points on our neckband to the marked points on our t-shirt. I like to put my seam on the center back, so I'm going to align that right sides together. So I'm going to make sure that my neckband is on the right side, touching the right side of my t-shirt. I have it inside out, so I'm going to be pinning the neckband to the inside of the shirt. Here's my center front notch, and I'm just going to align that with my center front notch on my neckband. And then we're going to match these quartered points as well. So I just align them, remove one pin, and then pin all 3 layers together. Something you can do to make this a little bit easier as a beginner is once you fold your neckband in half and you have 2 layers, run a basting stitch around those 2 layers. You can use your serger and serge them together, or you can use your sewing machine and use the longest straight stitch you have. Keeping those 2 layers together for you while you do this can really help a beginner, because keeping all 3 layers flush and even can be a little bit tricky. So if you sew your neckband together, just right here along the edge, then you'll just have 2 things keeping together, which you do all the time. So as you can see, my neckband is a little bit smaller than my t-shirt. And that's perfect. You do not want to make your neckband match the t-shirt neck hole perfectly. If you do and you sew it up, your neckband is going to fall away from your body. It's going to kind of stick up like a mock turtleneck type look. And unless that's the look that you're going for, you're not going to be happy. So t-shirt patterns will have the neckband be smaller than the neckline, just like this. It's another really important reason to use a good fabric that's suggested from the pattern as a beginner, because the percentage that it's calculated at will be calculated for a certain stretch and recovery. So if you're a beginner, make sure to follow those fabric suggestions very tightly until you really know your fabric types. So what we're going to do is we're going to stitch this on, and we're going to stretch the neckband to fit the shirt. I'm going to try very hard to squeeze you in tight where you can see me and where my body is not in the way, which can be very difficult. But I'm going to try to angle you in so that you can see it just perfectly. Okay, so here we are. I'm just going to take off a little bit, get into my seam allowance here at the back. And now I'm going to try to show you exactly. See, here's my t-shirt and here's my neckband. Clearly, I'm going to have to stretch this in order to make it fit. You want to make sure all your edges are perfectly even. 1, 2, 3 layers, all nice and even. I'm going to stretch all the way to this clippy. Grab it in the middle and then sew away. If you're finding your fabric for your neckband not wanting to stretch, you feel like you're really pulling that neckband to match, grab a different neckband fabric. If you're feeling like it's really straining the fabric, your fabric is not stretchy enough to be used for a neckband. So save yourself the trouble and grab a stretchier fabric. Again, I'm going to sew all the way till my clippy. When I get to the next one and I have to remove it, I'm going to take it out, stretch all the way, And then I'm going to sew until the next clip, making sure all 3 edges are aligned. Do not remove this clip till you're all done and you're nice and close. Often I'll see people say, I stretched it evenly till the very end and then I felt like I was stretching it a lot. What you're doing is stealing a little bit of the fabric from the next clippy if you remove it too soon. So stitch all the way to this pin or clip before removing. I like to nest my shoulder seams towards the back personally. Okay, now I'm coming around to the front. What I do is I just meet that seam allowance all the way over here. Here's my seam. So you can see I'm at 0 seam allowance here, and then I come into my seam allowance. Make sure to go all the way to meet my seam allowance here, and then I twist off. You can turn around and go back, but I find it not necessary. So now I'm nice and even with my seam allowance. I'm not trimming anything off anymore. I'm just going to quickly turn my thread off and snip it. So that way you have a nice smooth ending. What we're going to do is turn this right sides out now. And I am going to go give this a nice press on all the seams that I've sewn so far, especially my neckband. Since we have to stretch the neckband to fit the neckline, it's really, really vital that you give it a good steamy press afterwards. Okay, so I will press my seam allowance down towards the t-shirt. I'm going to press all my other seams, and I'm also going to give a press to all my hems. So on my hems, what I'm going to do, here's the very bottom of my t-shirt. I'm going to hem it up towards the wrong side, whatever my hem allowance is. This one for the bottom of the t-shirt is 1 inch. So I'm going to be pressing it 1 inch all around the bottom of the t-shirt. My hem allowance for the sleeves on this is 1/2 inch. So I'm only going to press it up 1/2 inch all the way around. I'll do that and I'll be right back at my cover stitch to finish this up. Okay, here we are all pressed up. Show you quick of my neckline, nice and pressed now. I have my hems all pressed to the wrong side. It is very, very, very important to pre-press your hems. I did not have a super great match to this sagey green, so I'm just going to be using this bone color and hoping that it looks all right. So here I am pressed up 1 inch to the wrong side. On the cover stitch, you have to sew from the right side of the garment, so I'm going to flip it over and stitch this way using my guidelines over here. There we go. So since I pre-pressed, it's nice and easy to just keep it folded, and then I want my stitch line pretty close to this edge. You can always trim some off, but you don't want to be above it. So I usually kind of try to stay on the safe side. Just lift my presser foot just a little bit over that seam allowance. This is such a thin drapey fabric. I have it pretty low on all the tension settings, and getting over that little seam allowance can be a little hard for some cover stitch machines like mine. And so I just kind of lift it up and over when I get to that point. That way it doesn't stall out right there. Okay, here is where I started. Again, I'm just going to lift it a little bit as it's getting over that seam allowance. When I've met and overlapped just a little bit, I'm just going to lock my stitch here. If you're using your sewing machine with a straight stitch, what you've got to do is make sure you don't stretch out your fabric. Pre-pressing, again, is really, really important to that. If you pre-press, it's a lot easier not to stretch it out. If you're finding yourself really struggling stretching out your fabric as you're stitching it, then I would highly recommend adding a little stabilizer in there. Something like a Wonder hem tape is wonderful. You want to get wash away for a knit, which means the first time you wash it, that tape will kind of dissolve and go away, and you won't lose your stretch. If you use hem tape that is not wash away on your knit fabrics, you will lose stretch there, and your fabric won't be able to stretch. Another thing people do, if you do not want to invest in the hem tape, is use things like tissue paper. They can feed the tissue paper in as you're sewing. It stabilizes the knit from stretching, and then you can just tear off the tissue paper once you're done. We have a blog all about tips and tricks of hemming knits if you are struggling. To hem your knit t-shirts. Okay, I've got one more sleeve to hem somewhere in here. There it is. And do that really quickly. Okay, now we can be completely done with the shirt now. Besides a little bit of trimming, I didn't trim all of my serger tails and things like that after I hemmed, but other than that, we can be done. You want to press your hems one more time. You can top stitch the neckband, and how you top stitch the neckband is really just a personal preference on how you like it to look. If you want to use a double needle and put both the needles on the underside, the t-shirt side of the seam. If you want to straddle it and put one needle on the neckband, one on the t-shirt. If you want to do a zigzag. There's really absolutely no right and wrong. It's whatever you like the look of. I often actually leave mine not top stitched. Today I think I'm going to top stitch it. I'm going to leave my needles where they are, and I'm going to straddle the seam. So I'll have one needle on the neckband and one on the t-shirt. Again, there's no right or wrong to this. It's just what you prefer the look of. I do it all different. Sometimes I don't top stitch at all. Sometimes I straddle the needle or straddle the seam like I am now. Sometimes I put them both on the t-shirt. You do want at least one needle on your seam allowance, which is the t-shirt side of your seam. Because really the point of top stitching is to keep that seam allowance down. So you want at least one of your needles on the t-shirt side, keeping your seam allowance held down. Other than that, you're free to make any choices about the way you want it to look. You're going to make sure you don't want to stretch your t-shirt as you are top stitching. Make sure never to top stitch your neckband before you have given it a good press. After you sew your neckband, you absolutely need to press it before you top stitch it. Otherwise, your neckband might not have popped all the way back into its shape, and then you're going to top stitch it and it's never going to be able to pop back into place basically. Okay, so there we are. I top stitched the neckband too on this one. I'm going to give it another good press around everything that I just stitched, so the neckband and all of the hems. And then I'll be done. I'll be ready to wear this t-shirt. I hope it made sewing a knit t-shirt not intimidating. It's really quite easy. Jump right in. If you have any questions, let us know. I can't wait to see your finished knit t-shirt. Bye y'all.